Welcome back to another Explain Yourself episode. I'm here at the Ecology Society of America conference, and my first interviewee is Toby Santamaria. She's a PhD student at Texas A&M University. So welcome. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me around. It's been a joy to finally run into you at this conference.
Yeah, right, because we're Twitter friends. Because Science Twitter is an awesome place to be, guys. So could you start us with your elevator pitch for what you're doing right now?
So what I'm doing science-wise or what I'm doing otherwise? Okay, so science-wise, I was really lucky. My PI got funding for me to start a whole summer early on my PhD. So right now what I'm working on is probably going to be the first phase of my dissertation, and I'm looking at how does savannas cycle carbon below ground? So what's the decomposition rate of these American savannas? Who's doing the decomposition? Is it, the microbes in these clay soils? Is it the roots? Is it only certain kinds of roots? Who's doing what? I need to know who's breathing out the carbon in this area for right now. So what I've done so far is not only have I collected, root samples and leaf samples of all the species that I can personally identify in my plots to do some DNA barcoding, so figure out what species are there, or at least what family of species are there. But I've also set out litter fall traps that I've built myself and then set out there to collect a litter to then make into a litter bag experiment where I would stuff those dead leaves into a bag and then bury it and be what do you weigh after 6 months or a year or whatever. Yeah. So right now that's my first thing. So my overall elevator pitch is kind of I'm interested in biogeochemistry, but I'm specifically looking at the movement of carbon kind of out of their places of storage. So out of the body of a plant or out of the soils and back into the air. What triggers that? What regulates that? That's kind of my jam.
Awesome. And yeah. I love hearing about other people doing decomposition research, because I think decomposition is incredibly fascinating.
Right? So important.
Yeah. So can you describe, I know what a litter bag experiment is, but for other people who may not have heard about that before, can you explain a little bit more about how you build those and what the overall process is?
Yeah. So for litter bag experiments, it's pretty simple actually. It's wild that it's so simple, but you basically take kind of any sort of leaf, and you want it to be a freshly dyed leaf. You don't want it to be something that's been dead for a while and there's mold on it, because then that's not informative of the process that's happening in the soil. So for my litter bag experiments, we're basically going to take some fiberglass mesh and fill it with a known volume or mass of leaves, so 40 grams or whatever, however much we think is appropriate, and then you'll kind of encapsulate and wrap the leaves in that mesh and sew it shut, so nothing can get out through the mesh bag. Whatever is getting out is because animals will either get through the mesh and eat the litter, or it'll be decomposed by bacteria, which can freely move between the mesh and the soil matrix. And so if I already know that I put 20 grams or whatever of leaf litter in the bag, and then I bury it, 6 months later I can unbury it and dust off the soil and then reweigh it, and that mass lost over that amount of time is the decomposition rate of the bacteria and other things in the soil. So overall, if I do that kind of iteratively through not only just my one ranch in Sonora, but all 3 ranches, then I can figure out overall this is how savannas in Texas act.
Okay. Nice.
In terms of below ground carbon.
All right. So you said you've got 3 ranches, so you have 3 different field sites that you're comparing?
Yeah. So hopefully what'll end up happening, it's very up in the air right now. Yeah. We're just kind of just 3 ranches, 40 by 40 acres, whatever. So right now my main ranch is at the Sonora Research Station out in Sonora, Texas, which is pretty close to Rock Springs, so in the middle of nowhere. But there's 2 other ranches. So there's one kind of 90 minutes away from Sonora, and there's another one about an hour away. So the idea is that we have each ranch has 14 plots, and the overall plot size is 40 by 40 acres, right? What we want to do is not just look at below ground carbon cycling, but look at how kind of those movements of carbon dioxide and carbon itself changes in response to different management that we impose on those systems. So we're going to have plots that are grazed, plots that are burned, and then plots that undergo both, and then your good old control plots where nothing happens. So what I want to see is the idea behind savannas, and to be honest, we don't really know anything about them. If we're all honest about what the literature says, it's just kind of a big shrug. But theoretically, grazing and fire are supposed to be really important in maintaining savannas over kind of woodland areas or rangelands, scrublands, or, you know, an actual forest.
Yep.
So fire is important because it removes all the fine litter and it makes space for all these seeds to germinate. And the grazing is important because goats are going to eat the tasty tree saplings. And if there's no tasty tree saplings, then a grass could come in and live there. But the other thing that's important about savannas is that, you know, they're basically underground forests, if you want to think of it that way. So forests themselves, we see the trees and like, oh yeah, their bark and their like girth in the trunk is where they store all their carbon. For savanna grasses, while the top stuff kind of dies down and grows back, the bottom, the important elements where all the carbon is stored in like tubers and the meristems and things like that, that's all below ground, and that's all huge. It's as huge as the grass is above ground, but below ground. So what I want to see is like, is the part that's important like the grazing part? Is it the fire part? Or is it both things? Because if it's pyrrhic herbivory, then we need to be pretty careful about what animals we're putting out there and how we're deciding to burn these places. And if, you know, the importance of one of these things is changing, especially in response to changes in climate, then we need to figure that out pretty fast, because we need to start managing these savanna lands rapidly to make sure that the people who depend on them to like graze their cattle or graze their goats and make a living that way can actually know what's up and prepare themselves and still have a livelihood at the end of whatever's going to happen.
Yeah.
you know, in the end of days.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. So it's fun because you're one of the people that I've spoken to who's sort of at the beginning of the research process instead of like partway through it. So how did you sort of come to deciding on this set of research projects?
I mean, I've always like really loved the idea of like terrestrial biogeochemistry. So like my first ever internship was, you know, doing forestry stuff and looking at below ground carbon cycling in monocrop pine plantations in North Carolina, right? And so there we were looking at if you clear cut a forest versus selectively log, like what does the soil do in response? Like, because if you clear cut a forest, like are you basically just giving the bacteria like a sugar buffet and they're just gonna go wild, you know? Versus if you selectively log and they're like, I guess this is okay, and kind of maintain a steady rate of carbon efflux out of the soil. Because right now, like a popular idea in Europe is like, what if we stopped using coal and instead of coal, used wood chips and wood pellets that you grow using fast growing trees like pines or sycamores in North Carolina. So that was kind of like my first taste of like theoretical stuff, but applied in a real time way. So like lugging a lycor out into the woods and being like, theoretically, I know one of these two things should be happening. What does the data tell me, and how does that inform the management policy I then ask these people at the plantation to do? So since then, and that was in 2015, since then I've just been kind of like slowly going deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of like, I want to do biogeochemistry, but I don't just want to like sit in a lab all day and do biogeochemistry. Like I want it to have some applied meaning. So when I was looking at PhD programs, you know, after all of my time in undergrad, I was like, I need to find something that's not just like ecology or EEB or whatever. I want to find something where there's like some applied facet to it. I need it to matter in real life in a tangible way, and not just like theoretically someone can read my paper in 10 years and apply something. I needed it to be now. Yeah. And so all of my programs were all different. So I applied to like a geology program. I applied to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and that's technically like not a cartography program, but something like that. Okay. There's obviously this ecosystem science and management, and then like maybe one straight up EEB program, and then a forestry program. Okay. Where it was really obvious that like the science I was going to be doing in the field and in the lab had to be taken outside and matter somewhere. And so I picked Texas A&M, not just because like it was the best choice like financially for me, but because it was the most obvious that like, no, like my research will have real world implications like as soon as I do it. Like it'll matter to the actual people of Sonora, Texas as soon as I do it, and as soon as I figure out like what is going to keep the savanna land a productive savanna land and keep it from being encroached upon by mosquitoes or, you know, turn into a carbon source that is ultimately detrimental for the space around it. Yeah. You know, so that's really how is like I went to Pine Map and I was like, wow, science can matter in real life. And then I was like, suddenly I can't go back to science not mattering in real life.
That's not to say that we ever hate on pure science, as it were, on this channel, but I've had this discussion with people before. Yeah, the idea of applied science and being able to hand this to the stakeholders of the land managers and say, here, you can use this to make what you do better is so valuable.
I think for me, it's like real in a different way, because like, obviously, not obviously, like it's only obvious if you follow me on Twitter, but like, growing up, like I lived on a ranch in Mexico, like, you know, it was like a huge part of my family's livelihood. And so when we lost that, I lost kind of like, not just an integral connection to my heritage, but like a really tangible way that like helped my family survive. And I don't want another family to go through that. So for me, like the motivation is very personal to be like, and my science needs to be applied, mostly because when I can't do this again, I don't want other people to have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, like, suddenly not having a way to support yourself is pretty jarring. And so like I appreciated my time as like a neurobiologist and like thinking about like the enteric nervous system in insects as a way to like maybe one day model something about humans in like 50 years. Like I appreciate that level of thought and that kind of like brick by brick thing. I just don't necessarily have like the personal emotional time for it.
That's fair. And so with the ranches where you'll be doing your research, have you spent a lot of time so far like talking to those stakeholders, and how does that, you know, interaction inform your science?
Yeah, so far everything is like pretty mediated through like the Texas A&M system, which is cool in a way, but also like weirdly detached. So like obviously all the people working on the ranches are like people from Texas who've like gone to Texas A&M and worked there for like a million years. And then I just kind of come in like, hi, I'm Toby, I'm from Arizona, like, can I do the things? And so it's like a little weird. And I don't really necessarily know how much the people of Sonora or Rock Springs know what I'm doing. But the other thing is that I don't really see them, because it's like, Sonora, the research station is there, and it's surrounded by like hundreds of other ranches, which are all also equally huge.
Right, yeah.
And so I don't really get that opportunity to like face-to-face, like stakeholder to stakeholder, be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. But I'm hoping that because I try to do a lot of science communication on Twitter and through my blog, that like, if they do ask me, I'll at least have a good spiel to give them. And a place where they can go and like look it up. It's not like there's not internet in Rock Springs. I can be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. But like, if you want more in depth, if you want like my resources, if you want my CV so that you can trust that I actually know what I'm doing, I'm not just like, you know, messing around out here with like a flamethrower, like, here you go, like, here's the link. So hopefully I can like get to that kind of space. What I really appreciated when I was a field technician in Norway is like the farmers whose land we were working on were like hyped to have us there. They had like little posters with like our pictures on there. And they were like, my farm is part of this great experiment with the University of Bergen. And I was like, I want my ranches to be like that. But like my ranches are literally owned by Texas A&M or like given to us by stakeholders who are like, we don't really want to run this ranch anymore, so you can just here, you know, which is so awkward to describe, but that's literally how the person who like the higher level brass and like the people I work with in Sonora, he was like, that's basically how we've got one of the ranches, is like someone was just like, look, I don't want this anymore, just here.
That's how a lot of research spaces wind up happening.
Yeah.
We get what we can. So you've had several different sorts of fieldwork experiences, which is awesome because I love talking about fieldwork. Fieldwork is fun and fieldwork is dirty sometimes and weird things happen. So what is your favorite thing about fieldwork?
My favorite thing about fieldwork, like other than the basic, like I'm outside.
Well, yeah. Outside is obviously better than inside.
I mean,
yeah.
I think the thing I like most about fieldwork is like, it's so tangible, like the work that you're doing. Like you can actually see like, wow, I went out and I collected like 37 samples of leaves and roots today. Like that's in like 4 hours, like that's so cool. Or you can actually go out and be like, okay, we just set up this burn experiment and then we like lit it up. And like now you can actually see the change. And so it's like very rewarding because it's like the payoff is immediate. It's not like when you like run a model in R and you're like coding for 7 hours and you're like, okay, run, and then you leave and pray that it runs or like doesn't crash your computer, you know? It's not that kind of like fear time lag. It's just like immediate, like I did the thing happened, you know? Like a very baby kind of like instant gratification. But I do like that, and it's like very reminiscent of like at least for me, when I do my stuff in Sonora, it's like very reminiscent of like being on my ranch in Sonora, Mexico. It's like just reminds me of like, oh yeah, I used to do hard work like for my job to like live, and now I'm still doing it for my job to like live. So it's a good way to like help me remember like this thing that I no longer have.
Okay. Is there a least favorite part of fieldwork?
I mean, I hate falling in the field because it's just so, because it's like so catastrophic. Like, it's never like, you don't just kind of like gently trip in the field and you're just like, you catch yourself. Like, if I trip out in Sonora, then I like fall onto like these, it's really cool like rock formations, but they're rocks and it really hurts. And then I just kind of like lay by the car for a second and I'm like, well, this happened. Or like if you fall in Norway, you're falling down the fjord, and you just kind of gotta, you hope you roll somewhere before you roll off the edge of it.
I put my foot in a burrow in the prairie the other day, and
Good
I was just
Lord.
like, it fell right on my face.
So when I was working in the Duke Forest for my pine map stuff, I went with Johnny Boggs, who I don't know if still works at Forestry Service or not, but he forgot to tell us that there were pits dug a long time ago in the Duke Forest that have been covered up, but not really.
Sure, yeah.
And so we're like walking through, and all of a sudden I just kind of fall to my waist and get kind of like slammed against the ground. And I like literally make like a barking noise because all the wind has been knocked out of me as I've fallen, And I'm like pulling myself out of this hole after I catch my breath. And Johnny goes, oh yeah, I forgot to tell y'all, there's holes everywhere around here. Like, just be really careful. And I was just like, yeah, thanks, So it just kind of like falling in the field just kind of like ruins everything for like 10 minutes. And it's very hard to get back into the like, oh yeah, I'm doing work now and not just experiencing physical pain, like, cause I can deal with like being heat sick and like all that kind of stuff, or being hungry, it's whatever. But like falling, I'm just like, now I have to waste spoons, like recuperating myself and then like getting back into the groove. Like, it's very tiring.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I liked that you sort of started to talk about how your childhood experiences sort of resonate with what you do now. So how did you decide to become a scientist? What was your journey to being where you are right now?
It wasn't really like a hardcore decision. Like, it wasn't like 8th grade AP Bio, like, what am I doing with my life? I'm gonna be a scientist, It was very much like formative things happened that like informed the like more lax choices I had to make. Okay. So growing up, my grandfather had this ranch in Sonora, Mexico, right? And like that's a story in and of itself. But at some point, everyone in kind of like that little mountain village had like too many cows for what was happening in the ecosystem at the time, right? And so that thing happens that always happens when you were like, I know this is a grassland that can only support like X amount of animals, but there's Y amount, and so now like the Dust Bowl's gonna happen.
So this was like literally the tragedy of the commons?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And so at some point, as a 12-year-old, like riding my uncle's horse through literally like a sea of dead cattle that, died because they had nothing to eat, I was like, okay, we gotta figure something out. This is like just going along with like what we think is supposed to happen was obviously not working, And so I got back to the States and like kind of realized like, okay, there's obviously no way that, me and my grandparents are gonna like move back to Mexico and like live off the ranch. Cause that was always my grandma's dream is like, you don't have to live in America anymore, mija. Like, we could go back, you could just go to Nogales High School, you could live at the ranch, Cause that whole kind of like when you're from Sonora, Mexico, it's like, your dream lifestyle is like the idyllic ranch life,
sure, Yeah.
And so like that was always like my grandparents, like, we're in America for right now because like it gets us money and like helps us live and like there's like quote unquote better opportunities here, whatever that means. and so, when we figured out that the ranch wasn't coming back, like the ranch collapsed and we lost most of our cattle and whatever, and then like we came back to the States after that kind of really bad year. of like the roundups, like, and realizing like, oh, we have like 14 cows left, great. You know, after that was kind of like the recession, right? And so my grandpa lost his job in that. And so he was older, and so there was no way he was going to get like a new job to replace it. So I'm like, okay, we don't have the ranch anymore. There's no way we're going to like get it back to its former glory, because we no longer have like the American financial resources to do that. Like, we were living off 18 grand a year. And so I was like, I either need to get good at something and like do something that will keep me floating around the American education system, or I don't know what's going to happen to me. Luckily for me, I sucked at everything but school. And so what ended up happening is like I ended up going to this kind of college prep high school called BASIS, right? And aside from all the political things that it means to go to BASIS, one of the things that ended up happening is I got really good at taking AP classes and getting 5s on AP exams, which included AP biology. And so kind of by the end of my career at BASIS, I had accumulated, you know, 13 AP exams, and I had gotten 5s on all but 3 of them. So I was like, okay, clearly this is good enough to get into some college somewhere and hopefully not have to pay for it, because, you know, at this point, like, my mom's moved out of my grandparents' house, like, she doesn't really do anything for us, like, not in like a bad way, like, I'd go visit her, but like, it was very much like she had her family with like my stepdad, and like I was with my grandparents. And you know, and I was like, so I'm not, obviously can't rely on anyone for help with college. And so I applied to all these places, and then Kenyon College finally got back to me, and they're like, do you want free ride to this small liberal arts college? And I was like, sure. College I applied to without even Googling what it is. Like, I didn't know anything about Kenyon. I was just like, I just knew it was in Ohio, and that like a friend from my high school went there and thought I would fit in. So I was like, I'll write the application, you know, like, it was very surreptitious. And so I was like, okay, I'm at Kenyon. What are the things Kenyon is good at? Obviously English, but like, that's not a career that like I have the financial wherewithal to like do. Like, I'm not Ransom Riggs, I'm not John Green, like I don't have that. No. I can't write like that. So I ended up floating around between the biology and the neuroscience department. The neuroscience department was obviously super huge in the 90s, and so it was still kind of riding those coattails, and I was like, maybe. And then one day I took an ecology course, and I had always been like better at like ecology type stuff than I was at like small scale biology or like chemistry in high school. And like in doing these ecology courses with the person who would be my advisor, I just kind of realized like I just like this a lot better. And like some of the things we talk about in here feels like it could be informative, you know, in the thing that like happened to me when we lost the ranch. And so I'm like, maybe I'll just kind of follow this thread wherever it goes, you know. And so in following the little red thread of fate, I ended up, you know, doing the internship at Pine Map, where I was like, wait, like there can literally just be applied science. Like, I don't have to just sit in a lab all day and like hope something means something, or, you know, form collaborations that hopefully end up applied science somewhere. Like, I can just do it. And so from Pine Map, I got into the internship at MBL, so that RU, where it was literally one of my projects was like a remediation project based on like years of like research into like how water stratifies and like what it means, and like, do sulfur reducing bacteria like oxygen? They don't. Put a bubbler in there, you know? And then, you know, I got back to like the more like nitty-gritty brick by brick science when I went to Norway and looked at like, if you physically remove all of a kind of plant, what does that do to carbon cycling? And does that follow some sort of like biogeographical or latitudinal gradient? And so it was mostly like just following things that felt like they could inform me on like what happened to me when I was 12 and all of this stuff happened. Because, you know, in the moment I was just like no one could really explain what had happened. And then as I got older and like went through all this ecology stuff, I was like, oh, like the literal, like you just said, like the literal tragedy of the commons, and then, you know, climate change. Yeah. Because it got way hotter than it usually does and way drier than it usually does, and it's been doing that for like decades now. It's almost like there's like a warming trend. Right. It's almost
like usual has changed what it means.
Right? Yeah. And so it was just mostly following that, and it was it was never like a hardcore, like I'm gonna be an ecologist. It was mostly like little choices that you make, like to apply to like this internship versus another one, or go work here versus work there. I think it's really rare that people have the moment where they just wake up and they're like, I'm gonna be a scientist, you know, because I definitely didn't have that moment of I'm gonna be a scientist until I was literally like sitting down like at the U of A SNRE. Like I had just visited with one of the professors there and I was like, I guess I'm applying to grad school and I guess I'm gonna be a scientist, you know, like, and then I started writing my applications, you know. It was never like a yes.
That's fantastic.
It was mostly just like, oh, I'm here.
Yeah. I think, we are here because we all have stories like that, right? This feels like a place where we fit and where we want to be, and we, like, one of the biggest parts of being a researcher is having questions, right? So we have questions because of our background and our experiences prior to this. Yeah, that's awesome. So you mentioned growing up with your grandparents and having lived in another country, and I know that on Twitter you are very vocal about sort of, no, in a good way, that you are very much invested in this idea of like amplifying the voices of underrepresented populations. So can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be a person in science with all of the things that go in your background?
I mean, to be honest, it's weird, and there's not like a really good way to, like, I don't want to say it's weird and it hurts all the time, because it doesn't, but it also doesn't feel great. You know, like it's like a very like, it's a weird duality to live, and I think it's like pretty exemplified by like how I just lived undergrad, because like for the first 2 years I didn't tell anybody. I wasn't like, yeah, I used to have this ranch in Mexico and like we would go there for like every other week for like years, and like, you know, like I could ride a horse before I could walk. Like I didn't tell anybody that in undergrad. I was just like, yeah, I'm from South Tucson. I went to a college prep high school called Basis. Does that sound scary? Yes, okay. And because in the end it didn't really matter. Like my grades never mattered more than like the fact that I didn't talk the way they did. My ability to do science never mattered more than the fact like how I look, or the fact that like I'm not a skinny white girl or whatever. Like nothing mattered more than the way I looked to people at first glance, and it colored the way they perceived everything else around me. And that was never more clear than like when I went to marine biological labs. And so there it was very much like, ah yes, the token brown girl is here to do research over the summer. And so at one point, like this lady had just met me and she knew I was from a liberal arts college. And not like Kenyon is like the cream of the crop of liberal arts colleges or colleges in general, but it's in the top 50. Like it's not like nothing. Yeah. And for me being like first gen and coming from the family that I came from that like honestly didn't care about like what I wanted in my life as long as I was like not messing it up. Like it was a huge accomplishment for me to be able to go to Kenyon and, you know, not have student loan debt and to be like part of this actually pretty vibrant research community that also cared a lot about mentoring students, especially first gen students and students of color. And so like, I'm here, it's like my first week at this internship, this lady just meets me and then she starts like mansplaining or like baby-splaining how to use Excel. And I'm like, ma'am, I'm a rising senior at Kenyon, like you don't need to baby-splain to me how to use Excel. And she was like, well, I don't know, and she just kind of like did that motion at me, and I was like, for real? Like, I get it, you're from Yale or Cornell or wherever you're from, but like, have I not proven that I can do all the hoops to get here? Like my GPA, is it not high enough? Do I not have enough prior experience? Like I've worked for the USDA Forestry Service through Pine Map. Like I've done research at my home institution. Like what did you need for me not to look the way that I do? Like for me not to have the accent that I do, which I don't even have an accent.
Not really, no.
Yeah.
Well, also, or conversely, everyone has an accent.
Yeah, and so like, like what she really needed was for me to be white, for her to respect me. And so, and that was like the whole thing at Marine Biological Labs. It's like, you know, it was this weird place where they were like, yeah, we want to recruit like liberal arts kids. And then one of the sessions was just like the class sessions was just them like dunking on liberal arts and like other R3s because like they're not places where you want to do research because like good research doesn't happen there. And I'm like, great, like 12 out of 13 of us RU students are from liberal arts colleges or non-R1 places. Like what the heck?
What's the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk, right?
Yeah.
They say all the right things, but they don't actually think it.
And so it was like, in that moment, I was just like, nothing matters except like me being true to myself and me figuring out like, what do I think success is and what do I need to do to get there? And so if these people want to pretend that because of how I look or because of how I act or where I come from that I can't do the things that they think are successful, like, fine, I'll put you on blast. I don't care. And, you know, it all started, like, it was March of 2017 and I'm like still recovering from marine biological labs and like, you know, I have my good science days and my bad science days, and like on the good days I'm like, maybe I can continue in academia, and on the bad days I'm like, I just want to not exist, like whatever. And I was just reading someone's like garbage argument with either Jacqueline Gill or somebody else where they're like, everything's fine for students in academia, like we don't need to pay them for their labor, like they get good experiences.
Yeah.
And I'm like reading this like inside like the local bar at Kenyon College, and I'm just like looking at it and like swirling my tater tot and my ketchup, and I'm like, what the hell am I reading? Like, I experience literal garbage to like read this in real life. So I was just like, it doesn't matter, you know, like I'm a white passing Latinx girl, like I'm mildly cute in the face, like I have enough privilege to at least hit out at this garbage. And so I just said what I needed to say about marine biological labs. I was just like, look, this is what happened to me. This is what happens a lot of the time to minority students. And if that makes you uncomfortable, it should, because you're ruining lives. My life has literally been in shambles since I've got back. And from then on, like the response that I got from it, I just realized like people either have no idea or they don't want to listen, and I can yell loud enough for both people to get the picture. And so that's just how it went, you know? And like by that point I had found enough of like not just confidence in myself, but like acceptance of what had happened to me that I could talk about it. Which I think is a really big barrier to especially women of color in STEM, like coming forward and telling stories, because everything about academia kind of gaslights you out of what actually happened or out of believing your own inner feelings about what happened. So like when I got back from MBL, like I had 2 advisors and I told both of them like, this is what happened to me, like help me process it. And obviously one of them was like, that's really horrible, like that shouldn't have happened, this is all wrong. And then the other one was like, do you ever think you just take things like too personally for no reason? Because I'm pretty sure this is like a you issue and not like a systemic issue or an MBL issue or anything like that. And I was like, okay. But like all of academia is essentially like you get one of those 2 responses, right? And so it's really hard to figure out, like, you have to really sit with yourself, and you know, and I've gotten really comfortable in the like sitting in my discomfort and then externalizing it, because it helps no one if I like keep inside everything that happened, but it helps other people to change if I say it or if I, you know, show them someone else's perspective. So that's just how it happened. I literally just got mad eating tater tots one day at a bar, seeing some trash, and I was like, let me tell you something, buddy. You know?
So with all of that in mind, what would you want people who have, you know, even share even just a little bit in common with your background, who might be interested in joining the scientific community, what would you want to say to them, or like let them know that they are going to have to sort of navigate things like that?
I would say be mindful, but don't be afraid. Because I feel like a lot of what held me back, especially in my early years of undergrad, was like, sorry.
Fine, don't worry about it.
I feel like what held me back a lot in early undergrad is like I was afraid, and less than savory characters in academia sensed that and used it to steer me to be either like little replicas of them, or to be the respectable person that they wanted me to be, and like erase parts of myself that to me were vital but to them were these kind of aberrations that didn't belong in academia, right? And so I would say, like, be mindful, but don't be afraid. Don't let your fear control you, and don't let it control other people and what they do to you. Because, like, ultimately, like, you're not a body to which things are done. You are like an active force. And it's really, really hard to get over that feeling of like, I am trapped here and I need help. And even if you do feel that, like, if you're mindful, you can figure out, like, who is my friend here and who will help me versus who is the person who is only helping me so that they can use me for their own ends. And I feel like I've gotten really good at that. And for everyone else, like, you can, I tell everyone what's happened to me. Like, I put it out there because if you can, you know, read what happened to me at MBL, or if you can read what happened to me like 3 days before graduation, or read what's happened to me like during my grad school search, if you can read that and you can see that and realize that you're going down that path, you can prevent it, you know? And so, like, never be afraid, only be mindful.
I love that. That's a very powerful statement, and it's easy to remember and it's easy to act on. Yeah, that's beautiful. And now something a little more forward thinking. I know you're just at the start of your PhD, but you have all of this wonderful dissertation work ahead of you. Do you know what you are thinking about doing after that? I know that's really far away to be thinking.
That's like 10 years down the line.
Oh, no.
I think I'm part of like this very weird group of like minoritized science friends who all want to like be professors in some capacity in order to kind of like revamp the system. Yeah. Because my big issue was like, the reason I gravitated maybe towards bad actors like in my fear is because like I didn't really have a role model to look up to. Like, there was a woman of color in the biology department. You know what I mean? Yeah. There was a man of color between neuroscience and biology. You know, like, yeah. There was like, you know, and so it was hard. Like, when you don't see yourself reflected, you don't know that you're okay to be that way, you know? Yeah. And so my big thing is like, whether or not I'm just looking at like the little lift. Whether or not I'm like a professor at an R1 or a professor at a small liberal arts college, I need to be a professor somewhere so that like other like Latinx people can like look up to me and be like, okay, I am okay in the way that I am and I can get where I need to go. There is someone like me to be that support system. Because one of the big failures, I think, of a lot of like, let's be allies, it's like, you can be my white ally all you want, but if I can't relate to you in some fundamental way, then like I'm not going to ultimately feel like I have the support system like to be a professor or like to get my PhD and then go into like governmental work. You need to see it yourself reflected somewhere in order for you to feel safe being there and contributing to that space. Yeah. So I just want to be like that mirror that lets you know that you are safe and can contribute to this space.
Yeah, representation is so important. Like we said before, being a scientist is about being a person still, so you need to be able to feel like you belong in the space. I love that. Is there anything else you would like everyone to know about you and what you do?
I mean, no, like you just find the tiara somewhere, like,
yeah.
And then I'm like, wait. I do want people to know that it's like okay to talk to me. I feel like a lot of the time people see me like lay it down on Twitter or lay it down in real life. Like, I get to click and clack and it's no mystery really. It's true. But at the end of the day, I don't want that to stop people from talking to me. I feel like a lot of the time when I come to conferences, like I was just telling you when we were walking over here that woman like came up to me, didn't introduce herself and didn't really like talk to me. She just wanted to like thank me for like making her aware of like the guilt she should feel.
But it was like talking at you.
But it was talking at me. Yeah. And I'm like, no, like converse with me, talk to me. Let's talk together and like converse about things. My goal is not to like shame you into submission or guilt you into submission or whatever. Like, my goal is like, let's have a conversation where empathy can enter both of us and we can realize like, okay, like this is why X behavior or Y system is wrong, and like here's A and B things to fix it, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm totally down for anyone who ever needs like advice or to vent or whatever. You know, like I'm not, like the tiara does not mean I'm like this untouchable science communication queen that you just take the law from. It's like, I want us to have a conversation, and the tiara is an easy way for you to find me to have it.
And as always, Twitter handles are down in the description.
Cool.
Well, it's awesome. Thank you so much, Toby.
Thank you. I'm sorry I like started to cry. I was like, wow.
That's why we do this, is because we are real people, right? We swear, we drink, we cry. Scientists are just people who have a job.
I'm just like, I swear I'm really good at this composure thing. It's just like sometimes I'm just like words and my body's like emotions.
It's fine. It's all fine. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was so good to meet you.
So if you liked this video, don't forget to like it. If you didn't like this video, please share it with someone who would. And if you'd like to support the Roving Naturalist, remember to hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. You can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.